I want to talk about two kinds of free will today: general free will, and then free will as it pertains to Eren. Or should I say, a lack of free will. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, you'll know I ultimately don't really believe in free will. This can be seen in these videos, and then this one. Honestly, I talk about it all the time. You've probably heard me say my stance in it before. But I want to reiterate that opinion for this video in its ultimate form, and I promise I will be adding a lot to it, especially as it pertains to Eren. We don't have free will, at least not in my humble opinion, and the collective consciousness is to blame for that. But what exactly is that? Well, friends, the collective consciousness is a giant network of information. When a person is born into this world, they are born within that collective, which itself is comprised of other people, yes, but is also affected by things like animals or general world experiences. Anything that happens to you is part of the collective consciousness. Each person affects those around them, and with the advent of the internet, this process becomes both streamlined and much further reaching, which is, well, essentially what Serial Experiments Lane is actually about. Go watch my video on it for more information. To get back on topic though, here's an excerpt from my video, You Are Just a Video Game Character. Well, it's kind of a weird concept, and especially a hard one to describe. Think of it as a collective, obviously. Every person within this collective exists. Each has an individual brain, but the ideas that flow within those brains are formed from external factors, other people. The collective consciousness is a giant network, almost like a giant brain, of free-flowing information, where every individual brain represents a neuron in the larger one. When a human is born, they are born within that collective, and every part of their nurtured self is, as previously discussed, filled in with information, of which interacts and coagulates with their natural instincts and nature elements to eventually, after a number of years, form their personality, their very mind. Just as something like a video game character is born through the ideas of another, we as beings are born through a similar process, formed by the various and incalculable number of ideas of other people. It's the same concept, but just with more variables. But even those ideas that we have that help shape others are entirely unoriginal and dependent on the collective consciousness. And to explain why, please listen to the example below. Here is another excerpt from my The Tortured Artist is, quote, not, quote, over real, How Creativity Works video, describing how this very concept informs all of our ideas. Take it away, past me. Let's stop beating around the bush here. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think creativity is, which means I have a sad reality to tell you. You have never come up with a good idea in your life. In fact, you have never come up with any idea in your life. Originality doesn't really exist. For a simple explanation, any idea you can possibly have is formed by your mind. But your mind is formed by your interactions with other beings and the environment around you. It's influenced by other ideas, meaning your ideas, the ones that come from your mind, are some combination of other ideas. For the full horrific implications of this, watch this video after this one is over. And sorry in advance. For the sake of this video, however, we'll be taking a look at this a different way, and think of this more on a quantum level. The collective consciousness, as Lane would call it, represents this, well, collective that we interact with. Think of this as everyone and everything else, a vast ocean that constantly influences waves to form other waves, and you are just one single burst of energy within that. But inside that collective consciousness are also possibilities. When looking at it from a mathematical or quantum point of view, we see that any possible idea, itself being a combination of other present or even future ideas, is there. I say future because we can use even those potential ideas to try and predetermine what ideas may come to being next. It's all quantifiable, even if only by some omniscient supercomputer. That's essentially how the collective consciousness works and what it is. But what exactly is free will? In my definition of what I think is the common interpretation, free will is the ability to make decisions independent from external factors. The problem with this then is that the collective consciousness dictates that everything about you, even down to every one of your very thoughts, is formed almost solely through external factors. meaning every decision we make, like, say, the rumbling for a good example, is not really ours to make. If anything, a soul is a set of longitude and latitude coordinates, with everything dictated by where you were born and to whom you were born to. But Alex, you're saying, that's just the nurture side of the argument. You're completely neglecting talking about the nature side. And you're right about that, as I don't believe our nature is as relevant as our nurture. It doesn't quite influence us as much, but that being said, I've already covered the nature side of the argument. For that, here is a quick excerpt from my Chainsaw Man analysis video. But I think the Devils in Chainsaw Man can even be boiled down to one question. Why do they kill humans? This is, of course, a metatextual question as well. Just as people in the story ask why the gun devil kills others, we as the audience ask why people kill each other with guns. Both questions at their root are rather incomprehensible. Every time we try to rationalize violence, we boil it down to human nature. But what exactly is that nature? Why is violence such a prominent part of evolution with all species on the planet? We can say survival of the fittest, sure, but why are we so apparently intent on surviving that we will hurt even our own species? I'm not sure. Of course, what makes these questions even more disturbing is that since both the answers for the devils and ourselves seems to boil down to abstract, inescapable nature, then they just further represent a termination of our free will. I mean, so far we only really have two sides of the self-development problem, nature versus nurture, and yet both sides seem to point towards the same inevitable truth. We have no freedom or real choice in the matter. Never mind the literal devils killing people based on their own fears in the story, that was restricting enough. But as I think I've made it clear, the questions are what should terrify the reader the most. Because at the end of the day, this is what we take home with us. That, above all, is what we must live with. Eren ultimately chooses violence. But why he does this, well, it's up for some serious debate. We could say it's in humanity's very nature to fight violence with violence, but if we do say that, we ultimately are taking away Eren's free will. We can say he is a child of war and that fear and violence is all he has ever really known from a formative age. I've made both of these claims already, but both take away his agency. Ultimately, we are born as a combination of an innumerable amount of factors. We develop in the way we do because we had experiences and formed relationships that were, for the most part, out of our control. I can even make a friend right now. I can choose to be friends with them, but that decision was formed based on my personality, which is ultimately based on external factors. Man, I'm saying ultimate a lot in this video. So even the experiences you have now, the ones you think you're choosing, well, you're really just pre-programmed to already choose them. Your fate was set in stone at the start, as though it were already determined by some wacky time travel shenanigans. But don't worry, we'll be getting to that. But what if we avoid all these external influences altogether? What if we are raised by no one and encounter no people during our journey here on Earth? Well, as Evangelion postures, then we wouldn't really be a person. As though you can fly anywhere you like to within this empty white void, you can never walk, as there is no line for you to ground yourself to. You have no reference point as to what you should do, how you should act, so you have no perception of what is up and what down is, what right and wrong are. You can never know what you don't know, as Tsubasa Hanakawa so brilliantly states. Therefore, you can never know what you're not explicitly taught, either by an actual lesson or, more likely, a life experience. Without external influences, you aren't really a person, meaning that to exist is to fundamentally not be free. It's some scary stuff. To further elaborate on what I mean when I say to exist is to not be free, here is an excerpt from my first ever Doku Doki Literature Club analysis video, without any direct spoilers for the game. So then, do we have free will at all? Well, that's a complicated question. If you were to define free will as having the ability to make decisions that are wholly separate from external influences, which I feel is the common interpretation, then no, free will does not exist. Furthermore, not only are humans incapable of possessing free will, but the most defining feature of even being human is to lack it. If you were to have it, you would not be able to exist. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the very opposite of free will is to be human. It's some scary stuff. Homo sapiens were not granted with the strongest bodies or predatory capabilities, so we had to survive almost solely with our communication. Over the years, this led to the development of societies and to the eventual world we see today. In this way, humanity acts more like a massive network of free-flowing information in order to survive than anything else. When our bodies are born into this world, the placement they ultimately end up in is what vastly determines the person we will become. If anything, a soul is perhaps nothing more than a set of longitude and latitude coordinates. Your mind, then, is created through your interactions with the collective consciousness, the network, all of which is external to yourself. That is to say that your personality, the very essence of your being, is born almost solely through external factors, which are then processed by internal ones such as instinct. When such factors become internalized and solidify within the brain, that is when a human is truly born. And that human will inevitably make many decisions in its lifetime. Decisions they believe they're making by wielding the power of free will. However, if your mind is molded almost solely by external influences, then any choice your mind makes is more of a disgusting amalgamation of those innumerable factors than anything resembling our concept of free will. Simply a byproduct of the collective consciousness. But there are a few avenues I want to go down here. I think I've now established why I don't believe in free will in the general sense, but this is still an Attack on Titan video. I should probably focus on the series at some point, so that's what I'll do. Eren is a powerless child had his home destroyed by a force of pure power. This, well, it established a concept within him, that power is absolute. This can be seen with a lot of kids who grow up within violence, even in parts of the US itself. As I discussed with Jinx/Powder from Arcane, self-esteem is a tricky issue. While it can be manipulated by so many different people, I think it's our environment that majorly decides it. And with Eren, the place he was born in is a pressurized system. The presence of the Titans is always present, right beyond those walls. And while many of the grown-up civilians don't truly recognize or acknowledge that fact, it is always in the forefront of Eren's mind. To him, he can't be free while they still exist. When living in a system like this, power can often become value. After his mom died, I have to imagine Eren had to question, if I were just stronger, could I have saved her? Of course, he gets that power and actually chooses to kill her, but we don't have to talk about that. To fight is to survive in these environments, to the point where, as I said, power is value. Violence is ultimately the goal. This is what Eren was taught at such a formative age. Something that was completely and utterly out of his control, yet undeniably influenced his decision to start the rumbling. Something like this can also be seen with Attack on Titan's second most important character, Gabby. She is a child indoctrinated under a certain belief. The people of Paradis are all devils that want to destroy the world. Her entire worldview is shaped by others, something that again is out of her control. She had no say in the environment she would ultimately be raised in, so much so that to be raised in a different environment would mean that she wouldn't be Gabby. To be Gabby at this beginning of the story is to hate the devils. To further illustrate this point, here is another brief example taken from my first Doku Doku Literature Club analysis video. But this can be taken even a step further and truly is where the existential horror pervades. I'll use the example of the monk again. Let's call him Ted O'Brien. If Ted were to be born in Colorado, then it could be assumed that he wouldn't become a monk. Seems simple enough. However, if it can be said that the environment we're brought up in ultimately determines the foundations we build our personality on, then I believe that Ted O'Brien, as we understand him, would no longer even exist if he was born in Colorado. Unless you believe in something as concrete as a human soul, I can't envision an argument that states that the concept of Ted O'Brien, the person that he is, could possibly exist regardless of whether he was born in India or Colorado. Depending on which of them he was born in, he would be a different person completely, with probably even a different name. The two, if they ever met, might even hate each other. You know, unscripted part in the voiceover here. I think this kind of, I had to look at this a little bit more, but this kind of almost means that every single moment in time, you're a completely different person since you're just at least a little bit changed. It's like you can't say Gabby is Gabby at the beginning of the story compared to the end. So I have to look into that because it's kind of a contradiction I'm realizing just now. Back to the video. I think I've made it clear why your environment shapes who you are and how the series most directly explores this concept through Gabby. Honestly, one of my only real gripes with the ending is how Gabby didn't really do too much. Even though I consider her to be, as I said, not only the second most important character behind Eren, but a direct mirror of him. She eventually is able to break out of her mindset and become a better person, which seems to negate my point here. It would, except for the fact she goes to Parody in the first place on a revenge trip, and that's where she changes. Something she wouldn't do if she had the freedom to decide whether or not she thought the people there were devils. Once again, the change to her personality is something out of her control. Something almost predestined to happen, which I can go down how that is, but I think you get the point now. That like it's because of all the different people that she has encountered and were destined she was destined to encounter along the way. That Parody was going to attack Marley and that they're all going to get tangled up and things like that. Still, what Attack on Titan is trying to tell us is that despite how bleak and hopeless the situation may seem, we can still try and fight against fate. Even if that fight is something predetermined by outside factors, I don't think it makes it any less important. The most popular video on this channel at the time of this writing is my analysis of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and in it I discussed the free will of David Martinez, the main character / protagonist. This was under the context of a kid who grew up poor and completely undervalued by the greater world at large. In that video, I stated that this is the cause of David's low self-esteem, and is ultimately what makes him choose the life of Cyberpunk, because he owes no value over his own life. I'd like to take a look at Eren through this scope. He doesn't exactly have low self-esteem, and it can be said that he values his life over all others. In this way, he is the opposite of David, so why even bring it up? Well, friends, I do it for good reason. Eren isn't actually so different. Let me explain. When living in a world that is filled only with fear, with the constant pressure existing just beyond those fragile walls, life can seem just a little bit bleak. And since things are so bleak, that can devalue life within your own eyes. Being taught at a young and formative age that life is fickle, that things can end at any moment, creates a unique kind of person. Someone who usually secretly cares very little for their own life, and cares even less for the life around them. Or they can value life above all. It can really go either way, as Armin does. In Eren's case, he is a combination of these two, as he believes himself to be special simply because he was born of this world. This puts him on a mad path that values freedom above everything else, without ever really knowing what that means, and without ever considering the quality of life for everyone else. Lives that he ultimately values very little, in no small part due to the desensitization, I could not pronounce that word, towards violence he was exposed to from an early age. He clearly still cares about these lives, but just not nearly enough, and certainly not more than his own. What the series is ultimately trying to do, at least I believe, is showcase a predetermined fate. This is the metatextual significance of the Founder Titan's and Attack Titan's ability to transcend time itself. To show us that while we can make our own decisions detached from others, the personality and very mind we make those decisions from is undeniably influenced by others. When a child is born, they also live in the past, present, and future, all simultaneously, at least in a weird roundabout way. Everything they're going to do, everything they're going to be, is determined within that exact moment, as every person they'll ever meet are also set in their own paths. Think of it this way. The collective consciousness is a vast ocean, and within that ocean are waves. They represent the individual people. Those waves then surge with energy, and then create other new waves in the water. Except the pathway for each wave is already predetermined, as its energy level and trajectory are already set in stone due to the influence of other waves. And those waves, I'm sure saying waves a lot here, are also influenced by others. It's a constant line of descending turtles down the rabbit hole, with each wave both affecting others and being affected by others. Each person in this life is set on a predetermined path, and that path will have them meeting a lot of different people. They are predetermined to meet those people, as the circumstances of those others' lives have dictated they would meet said person. Something we'll be getting into more in a bit. In this way, a child can live in the past because they have been formed by it. They can live in the present because they are, well, literally living in it. And they can live in the future because that future is set in stone. You can try to rebel against that future, but that just means you are meant for a different future, like Gabby. That some part of you would dictate that you would eventually go against the most obvious path. And just because the obvious one doesn't mean it's necessarily the path you were meant to go down. I think this is the importance of the paths and why it gets its name. All Eldians on a fundamental level are connected via the paths, and are, in a way, all enslaved to it. Not even to mention that at any moment they can become a Titan, but even their very memories are subject to manipulation. Memories make up such a huge part of our personalities, so if you can selectively delete them through the past and founding Titan powers, you can essentially control these people, giving them no true free will. And at a metatextual level, these paths are the same as the path other people take towards you, forming who you are, developing memories with you. But I want to take this a step further and fully illustrate to you how important your memory is, to the point where every single second of your perceived reality is a memory. This is admittedly my biggest stretch of the video, my furthest reach if you would, so if you'd like to skip this excerpt, here is the timestamp. I do promise it is very interesting, if not a slight bit off topic though, and it comes from a video I was super proud of yet not many people watched. So please allow me to indulge myself just a bit here. Oh yeah, and the video is entirely about my intense fear of lily pads. Enjoy. Reality is a fickle thing. Our own perception of it, our own reality, you could put it, is entirely different from any real physical world. While the color red does scientifically exist as a number, those numbers are simply a perception of the natural world, our attempt to quantify it. And even our eyes' interpretation of the color red cannot be said to be the same across different people. It's been proven time and time again that our brains do not perceive the world on a one-to-one basis, and often take shortcuts to make living in it much easier. Imagine driving to work. You're 43 years old, and at this point, you've been making this commute for 20 years now. It's habitual. So I guarantee you that you did not remember this individual drive. When you're in that car now for years even, your mind has been elsewhere. In your own reality, you weren't really driving that car, as our perception is almost entirely derived from our memory. If you don't remember the drive, it, from your point of view, didn't really happen. But of course it did, that's undeniable. But within your mind's eye, which is the only thing that can really form your own reality, it didn't. And you can argue that consciousness is not entirely tied to memory. Thus, even if you don't remember something, your mind, not just your brain, did process it. You were alive in that car. And I see your point here, but I disagree. We live entirely within memories. We exist as a concept in the memories of others, but even more than that, our entire reality that we, our minds experience, is remembered, not lived. If a ball is thrown at you, you'll probably catch it. But there is a specific point in time when the ball is thrown, a nanosecond in the natural world. That is undeniable. However, your brain's computing power is not instantaneous. It will take at least a few milliseconds before your brain can process the information hurling at you. So the time that the ball is thrown at you and the time that you perceive the ball to be thrown is entirely not the same. Thus, your brain's awareness is fundamentally not in line with the flow of actual reality, instead having to create a plane of perceived reality. But the only way we can form that plane is with not just the power of the brain, but of the mind, which I believe to be inherently different, but fully explaining that would be a whole book in and of itself. Don't worry, I'm working on it. This is where the situation becomes even more dire. Because while the brain can process and make the body react within a few milliseconds at the minimum by catching the ball, the mind is twice as slow, if not longer. Just because your body reacts doesn't mean your mind is aware of it yet. This is what we call muscle memory, or in first-time cases, a fight-or-flight reaction. Let's go back to our example. The ball is thrown, your brain computes that. It's purely mechanical. The brain will send signals to your muscles to do the task of catching the ball. But the mind is a bit more abstract than that. Once past the emergency response, it becomes unclear what it means for something to actually be thrown. It's technically an abstract concept. This kind of processing power, the ability to fully understand things, is derived from the brain's ability to cross-examine memories and past experiences, using clues in your own learned history to determine what exactly is happening. For the extremely short version, this is what we'll call the mind for now. Of course, one could imagine this process would take a bit longer than it would take for the ball to hit your glove. But you also have to take into account that before any rock-solid conclusion can be made about what's happening, the mind would like a bit more confirmation. That would come in the form of signals coming from your hand's nervous system, more specifically its pain receptors, and traveling up to your brain, confirming that the ball has hit your hand and that what was happening was indeed a ball being thrown at you. Finally, your mind can then process that new information and come to its definite conclusion. At this, you have now come to understand within your own reality that a ball was thrown in your direction. Good job. While this process, ironically enough, involves so much quick thinking that we can't even think about it, it's undeniable that there is a significant delay in your perceived reality's time versus actual reality's time. Even if you've caught that same ball a million times already, there will still always be a delay. And since a memory is a record of something that once happened, you cannot be said to live within anything but a memory of the past, even if to you, you perceive it as happening in the moment. Which I suppose from your perspective that isn't really a memory, but that just further proves how warped your own reality is. So disconnected and delayed from what's actually happening in the real world. Furthermore, it may not technically be registered as a memory within your brain, as it's sort of happening in real time, but then the mind would almost serve as a memory storage database for the experiences your brain has, which then only get fully contextualized within the mind. But by that time, the brain's initial reactionary awareness is already kind of moved on. So I don't know if you can call what is left for the mind to process anything but a memory. Now, I'd have to think about this a lot more before I made a definite conclusion on this, but in some way you can kind of say that the process of analyzing these memories is what the mind is, but I'll give a more solidified answer to that in the future. Thus, that's where we ultimately reside, though. This isn't even to point out how a moment in time is the most incalculable thing in existence, and that it is almost impossible to determine what is a memory and what isn't. But I think we'll save that for a discussion on the second greatest anime ever made, Steins Gate. So, in conclusion, you are a ghost. Eren will enact the rumbling. This future has been set in stone. And this isn't because he already has in a future timeline, but rather because this is the person he is. A perpetually idiotic child with the desire to see his idealistic world, whether it be flattened or not. His trauma, his circumstances, his choices led him to this point. This, I believe, is the metatextual theme behind Eren's freedom, and what I believe Isiam was trying to portray here. Eren tries to rebel against his fate, especially by doing little things like not saving the kid, but of course, he does. It's just as he predicted, just as he saw in his visions. because that's simply who Eren is. Of course, he does pretty much time travel in the actual story proper, and I can't just ignore that fact. In this way, of course, Eren isn't free, since the future is quite literally set in stone. I find the metatextual theme more interesting than this textual one, though, as it's pretty obvious that Eren has no freedom here whatsoever. But even if we were to ignore this, as I've illustrated, Eren would still not be free. The future would still be set in stone. He just wouldn't be able to predict it. If you want a video on why Eren's not free because of this, these time travel shenanigans, go watch Invader's video linked in the description. Think of it this way. We are all video game characters. Ultimately, we are data, a product of the collective consciousness, itself a massive information network, and just like a video game character, all of our choices are determined by external factors out of our control. But surely we must be different, right? Wrong. As I discussed in this video here, well, I think I said it best there, in which I explained, all a video game character is, when boiled down to its central elements, is predetermined action. Everything it is going to do, every part of its journey is part of an intentionally programmed predetermined fate. Humans don't really work like that, however. We have what I would like to call real-time action, which is pretty self-explanatory. We have the ability to make decisions in real time without it being necessarily decided beforehand. We have a consciousness, a center to which we may make decisions. In this way, we aren't a video game character, which is just a being entirely defined by predetermined actions, words, and creative personalities. However, can we really be sure of that conclusion? Sure, we do undeniably have real-time action, that much is certain, but what does that really mean for us? We have an essence that makes decisions, but that essence is entirely out of our control. So much so that I hesitate to even use the word "are," as I'm starting to deny that we even exist on that level. If everything about you is fatalistic, everything predetermined by either nature or nurture, by the collective consciousness and all the interactions you've ever had, if your ideas aren't even your own, then what do you own? What, I ask, constitutes who you are? Where is your essence when everything about your soul is, as I said in my last DDLC video, a set of longitude and latitude coordinates, determined by where you were born and to whom you were born to? These are hard questions to answer. To me, it doesn't seem like we are very dissimilar from a video game character. Sure, they lacked real-time decision-making, but since any decision we make using that is predetermined by our personality and mind, which is predetermined since birth, out of our control, through a complex web of interactions we are destined to eventually have, then we're just as predeterministic as a video game character, just with an extra step. We lack a true center, as our center has an inherent external connection to the outside world. It's almost as if we are connected via cable to the collective consciousness at all times. I feel I need to elaborate a bit on my statement of since birth, since it's a bit of a stretch. What I mean when I say this is that, through an incalculable number of factors, every person you will ever meet, determined by their own personalities, is predetermined as well. Not that you start with a set personality at birth, but rather you start on a path towards that predetermined personality. Let's look at an example. Two people meet at a Mexican restaurant. They talk and eventually fall in love. A very cute, loving story. However, their meeting was of a predetermined fate, as they were both raised in a similar area and brought to the same restaurant as kids, making them want to also frequent it as adults. They meet at noon on a Tuesday because they were both raised to become independent thinkers and both pursued a field that allowed them schedule flexibility. Perhaps one even works at home as a YouTuber. Little voiceover note here, but it would also make sense that they're both outgoing naturally. They're kind of raised to be that way, so they would actually talk to a stranger at noon on a Tuesday at a Mexican restaurant. And the final nail in the coffin, because of how they were raised and the personalities they eventually developed, they became both compatible and attracted to the other person's archetype, thus ensuring they would hit it off. They stay together both because they are both traditional Catholics and are taught to hold on to a relationship, looking down just a bit on divorce, and because they both happen to be caring people. Thus, they die old together, happy, and perhaps unaware of their predetermined fate. Now take this concept and simple example and multiply it by like a Googleplex or something, and you have this incalculable number of interactions, this entangling web that determines everything. Alright, back to our regular scheduled programming. So when you really boil it down, the only thing that separates us from being a video game character is our real-time action versus their predetermined action. But since our real-time action is, as we discussed, so superficial, so dependent on others, so lacking in freedom of choice, the difference is basically nothing at all. Nothing at all. This concept is especially bad if you believe in virtually any type of religion, where the god or gods is said belief are omniscient. They know what is going to happen, meaning that something is already predetermined to happen. And since Attack on Titan may just be a religious allegory, a point which I'll be using in an older video to discuss in this larger video, well, our prospects aren't looking too great. This being said, however, this doesn't justify his actions. We just can't justify mass murder. We as a society mustn't do this. What this lack of free will does then is simply explain it. How an idiotic child such as Eren, a child born in a world filled to the brim with fear and violence, was destined to enact the rumbling. He didn't have to do it. And I think that's crucial here. He wanted to do it. Not because he actively wanted to kill people, but because he wanted to realize his idealistic vision of the world. While he doesn't have free will, it is Eren as a person that is fundamentally flawed, since this is what he wanted. But Eren is a slave to freedom. He chases it above all. But even this fact, this singular fact that he holds nearest and dearest to his heart, that defines his entire character, was because of someone else. This is ultimately why he enacts the rumbling, to see a world that didn't hate him, didn't want to kill him, to see a world that fit the vision Armin had molded into his head. In this way, the rumbling is partially Armin's fault, as he so brilliantly states, especially as he also says in Season 1, I think, that someone who can't sacrifice anything can't change anything. Words Eren surely took to heart, but more so, it's his mom's fault. Because she told him my favorite words in the entire series, because you were born of this world. This creates a sense of entitlement within Eren. It tells him that he deserves to see the world beyond the walls exactly how he envisioned it. It's also his father's fault for explicitly telling him, you are free. This is why he chases after freedom so recklessly. It's his one defining trait. But if he had a different mother or father, had he been born in an environment that didn't threaten his freedom at every turn, he wouldn't wish for free will so very badly. But then, of course, he wouldn't be Eren. As to be Eren is to want to be free. He would be, and say it with me now, Ted O'Brien. And now, a word from our sponsor, Squid Boy. Here is the trailer. And as always, thank you for watching.